And thank you for the introduction, Laura, although I haven't followed it all. But I'm hoping I'm kind of following up from what you said. So a very warm welcome from me as well. So my name is Claudia Coppenolle. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Impact Alliance. And the Impact Alliance, maybe a few words for the ones who don't know us. We are a public good, so a non-commercial technology venture. And we have just very recently, so this summer, launched an interactive digital data platform. And this platform really aims to provide asset managers, and I hope there are some of you on this call today, with a very practical way to classify the impacts, so the social environmental impacts of investments, while then distributing this information in a streamlined and consistent way to asset owners, who have told us that they currently really struggle to assess and understand the impact that occur in their often multi-asset class and multi-manager portfolios. So unlike other data platforms and providers in this space, we offer free and public information. So everyone in the investment community who wants to use our system can do so. And the reason that is relevant is because we really want to drive broader and more widestream adoption of consistent impact classification. So a more standardized way on how people can think about impacts. And Laura has, when outlining the impact classes, hopefully explained to a certain degree on the logic we are applying to do so. But then obviously also we want to make it much easier for investors and asset owners to actually find and construct those portfolios that include impact-oriented strategies. As you can see on the slide, the Impact Alliance is a collaborative effort. It's really meant to be something that comes from the market for the market. And some of the sponsors on the slide are actually those that enable us to offer our systems free of charge. But we also have an asset manager practitioner working group, who I will show on a little bit later. And their role really is to steward and govern the platform with regards to practicality. So we really want this to be something that can be immediately used by practitioners, but then also help us with the standardization and the syncing with other evolving standards and frameworks over time. So the reason this network and alliance or collaboration effort is relevant for us is that we agree that ultimately we really want this to become something that can help the market come together and make it easier for everyone to navigate the ecosystem. And hence, we are sharing data with other platforms, and we really welcome everyone to use the system, be it the data we are collecting as well as the system itself. Next slide, please. Really different user groups and different sections to the system. So this is the impact classification system, which is used by asset managers to classify their funds. And with a myriad of impact measurement, management, and reporting frameworks out there, and the various different reporting demands that fund managers are faced with, we really try to streamline those demands and create a system that allows an asset manager to describe in their own language, but following a guided digital process, to describe how they assess, measure, manage, and report impacts to date. So it is not an extra burden, it just summarizes their current measurement into a different, into a standard. Then there is a second section, which is used by, next slide, please. Then when an asset manager has gone through that digital process and classified their fund on the basis of the impact classes, this information can actually be assessed and used by asset owners who want to evaluate the impact across asset classes and managers, and they can bring it in a consistent portfolio view, as you see here on the slide. So you can immediately assess by the categories on how your portfolio performs with regards to its impact behavior or the impact classes. And the reason is obviously that we want to unlock capital that can actually more advance global goals, but also be more in line with your impact intentions.
We have to get concluded. We have less than a minute to finish this. Right.
On the next slide, you can then see additional information that you can use to run a due diligence on each of the underlying funds in that portfolio. And then on the next slide, the type of search and filter function you could be applied to find impact aligned funds. And then next slide, please. As I mentioned, if you want to join our efforts, or if you want to see who has already classified using the system, this is our practitioner. They have the funds online, and how it all works in practice, my colleague James will now show you in a live demonstration.
Great, thanks so much, Claudia. Hi everyone, and it's great to be with you all today. So I'm about to jump into a demo, but before I do, I'll just talk briefly about the social environmental performance data and the way it relates to the impact classes that Laura described. So as Laura described, impact classes are a way to segment a portfolio by impact. And if you think about a multi-asset class portfolio manager today, when they look across their portfolio and they're dealing with something like the following, they'll assess a public market equity fund and they'll be looking at ESG data from MSCI. Next, they look at a real estate portfolio and perhaps they're looking at information from GRESB. And then they look at a private equity portfolio and perhaps there's a mix of IRIS plus core metric sets or custom metrics. And the point here is that at some stage, the multi-asset portfolio manager has to step back from all of that information and build a picture of the overall impact of the portfolio. One, because they need this to understand for their own allocation decisions, and two, because the beneficiaries of large pools of assets like pension funds are increasingly demanding to know the overall impact that their investments have on the world. And asset owners need a way to communicate this impact to beneficiaries in a really digestible way, because of course those kind of stakeholders are never going to go down to the real granular level of an individual impact. And the hypothesis of the ICS is that, at least in the near term, we'll continue to see these many different types of data sources that are available to provide information relevant to understanding social and environmental impact of the portfolio. And it's in this context that we think that the categories of ABC that Laura described and the associated impact classes offer a useful way for funds to communicate the overall impact in a way that helps asset allocators segment their portfolio. And we think this because the categories were developed in consultation with a broad range of disciplines, and they are one of the few ways of segmenting impact that focuses on performance rather than themes or strategies. So whether it's a climate portfolio, an education fund, ESG integrated values aligned fund, if you look to the underlying data that you have, then you can begin to map them on the spectrum of ABC. And that's because these ABC categories, they represent some distinct patterns of underlying performance. For example, to distinguish between positive and negative, you need a threshold to tell whether you are reducing a negative or increasing a positive, and that's the difference between an A and a B. Or if you have information that shows that a stakeholder is underserved at the baseline, and then once that they've engaged with an enterprise, they are experiencing a positive outcome, then you've taken an underserved stakeholder to being well served, and therefore you've generated a new positive outcome or contributed to solutions. So it's just to say that whilst the sources of data may vary, you can look for those sort of common features in the performance data, and that allows you to start mapping investments onto these ABC categories. So I'll now skip over to the demo itself, and I think I'm going to drop off screen here in terms of my camera. So I'm still with you, but I'll just move into the screen. So I'm going to start off with an example of a fund, a Coppenolle charity bond fund, which is a fund open to bonds and is based here in the UK. And just to give you a sense of the classification statement of the ICS, and it starts off with key information that you'd expect to see on any fund. And immediately, as you scroll down, you can see how the fund has classified according to those impact classes. You can notice here that they've adopted just 2 of the investor contribution strategies of Signal and Engage. And then you actually notice that when they look to their underlying assets within the portfolio of this bond fund, they find that their assets are spread across a number of the different impact classes. And that's a very common scenario for many funds. And it's worth pointing out here as well that this classification system isn't just for purely impact-oriented funds. It's for any fund that is managing its impact to some degree. So you can classify a fund that is perhaps not specifically marketed as an impact fund, but it is measuring its impact to some degree, and therefore you are able to distinguish between whether its underlying investments are acting to avoid harm, benefit stakeholders, etc. I'll continue on down. So then you see that the system prompts a user to think about how it is contributing to the SDGs regarding these ABC categories. So is a fund that would detract from achieving the SDG? Is it benefiting stakeholders, so maintaining a positive level, or maintaining a SDG for stakeholders that are already achieving it? Or are they generating new positive outcomes, meaning generating positive outcomes for those that didn't otherwise have access to the SDG? And then we move down to how the fund is substantiating that information, and it's separated into 2 sections, which are the practices, so the processes and procedures that the fund has in place, and performance, so what type of performance data is the fund using. And in the practices, you can see here on this example, there's basic exclusions and the way that the fund is using social and environmental data and for what objective. So you can see their primary objectives for the use of social and environmental data here is to mitigate financial risk and maximize long-term return. I mean, we can point to how the fund is engaging with existing market initiatives which encourage funds to do things the same way. These are, as an example here, we have the UNPRI principles for responsible investment. And so if a fund has gone through the process of filling out that the reporting assessment framework, they can just use this system to point to where that information is available. And so this system is then just trying to bring together this variety of sources of information that are likely already available, but it's bringing them together into one logical organizing structure. So we have principles, accreditations that a fund uses, and then whether there's any fund-specific principles. So in this case, the fund is a signatory to the IFC's operating principles for impact management. Then it's other methodologies that they're using. Then we move on to the performance section, which looks at what types of data the fund is using to understand its social and environmental performance. So here's a public markets fund, so it's used a variety of data providers to begin to triangulate the social and environmental impact of the fund. And then we also ask whether they are regularly requesting data against any particular metric sets, and in this case they're focused on CDP's carbon disclosure project's information. And then this section up here is saying, okay, well, given that variety, how are you interpreting that data to segment your assets between the A, B, and C categories? And what we learned is that there's multiple ways that this is achieved when you look across different funds. And here you can see that the fund is using third-party ratings as a sort of proxy for negative outcomes being reduced. And then when we look across the benefit stakeholders, they're using some due diligence conducted prior to investment, existing research, and then they're using data that is used as proxy for positive outcomes, so perhaps revenue exposure to certain economic activities. And I'll just close by quickly comparing this to another fund, which is the Create Impact Fund, which Lara, I think, who I believe is up next, will be able to give you some more color on. But I just wanted to show you how 2 different types of fund. This is a public markets one fund, and this is a private equity fund. How you can start to see the differences when you start mapping these investment products. So you can see here, Create Impact, which is focused on impact. They map their assets to several different investor contribution strategies, and they're all in the contribute to solutions column. And then when we look to the the impact on the SDGs, you can see that unsurprisingly the Creas Impacto has got more in the contribute to solutions column. But it's also worth pointing out that, for example, the Coppenolle fund has still got some assets which they believe are contributing to solutions in the industry, innovation and infrastructure. So if I was to interrogate these two different funds, I'd be looking on the Coppenolle fund to see whether, okay, well, is the fund generating outcomes for this SDG that are for otherwise underserved stakeholders? And that would be my due diligence question to try and narrow in on the type of data that I would need to understand that type of impact. Carry on down, and you can see that Creas has several main impact areas which they've expressed, and that's because when you look at the objectives that they actually specifically have objectives which target solutions to social and environmental issues. There's some differences in the type of practices that they have. They both use the operating principles for impact management, but the Creas Impacto uses this social and value international principles as well. And so this kind of information can give you a sense of the type of information that a fund would be able to provide. And
okay,
I'm just
James,
going to
we have to get concluded.
Yeah, perfect. I'm just finishing off now, Augustine, so that's great. So I'm just going to close there by saying that hopefully this gives you a sense of how this system enables a fund to give a sense of the type of information that they are collecting and their processes to be able to manage their impact, but then relates those different approaches to this common language of the impact classes. And with that, I'll Augustine, and thanks so much for your time.